It began with a frantic knock, sharp, desperate, and the silent gaze of a man who couldn't look away. In a parched and forgotten field scorched beneath the relentless Montana sun, where compassion had long since withered, a woman stood alone. Her belly swollen with life, her soul barren of hope, her identity stripped down to nothing but survival. She was nameless to them, meaningless, a transaction waiting to happen, until, quietly, without fanfare, a stranger stepped forward, not just to intervene but to offer something rare, dignity, hope, and the start of something that would become much more than just a rescue. What unfolded from that moment was not merely an act of kindness, it was a profound act of redemption. A quiet rebirth of two broken souls. The kind of miracle that arrives unannounced, leaves an imprint forever, and reminds us that love, courage, and second chances are not myths, they are lights left on, in the darkness, just in case someone is still searching. If stories like that speak to you, perhaps you've found the right place. Now let us begin. The sun over western Montana was harsh that day, an unrelenting, scorching presence in a sky so blue it felt cruel. Not a cloud in sight, not a whisper of wind. The land stretched dry and broken, thirsting for rain it hadn't known in weeks. The air itself seemed to carry weight, thick with dust that clung like memory, like regret. Beneath that oppressive sun, in a forgotten clearing carved out by desperation, a silent gathering formed. No signs, no official order, just people, buyers, sellers, drawn together by something unspoken and shameful. They didn't barter livestock today. No engines or tools or produce were offered. Today it was a woman. She stood barefoot in the center of the ring, arms wrapped around her protruding stomach, shielding the unborn child inside as if that simple gesture could protect them both. Her name was Evelyn, 7 months along. Her skin red from sun exposure, her blonde hair stuck in thick, salty strands to the back of her neck. And yet she did not cry. That part of her, the part that weeps, had dried up long before, evaporated with the last drops of grace this place had seen. Beside her was the man who brought her here, Troy Lasker. Broad shoulders, a wiry beard, hollow eyes, and the twisted smirk of a man who had long ago sold every good piece of himself. "Gentlemen," he said, lifting a crumpled water bottle as though he were making a toast, "she's a good worker, doesn't talk back. And you're not just buying one today, she's carrying another, 2 for the price of 1. Silence followed. A bead of sweat traced down Evelyn's spine, but she didn't flinch. Troy laughed sharply and yanked a wedding band off her finger, holding it up like some carnival prize. "I'll even throw in her ring." No one moved. One man coughed. Another shifted his boots, the dirt groaning beneath him. But no hand went up. No one placed a bid. Even among the morally lost, there were limits. A pregnant woman, it seemed, was too far, too risky, too wrong. Troy's grin collapsed. "What? None of you want a deal?" he growled, voice souring. "You afraid of a little responsibility?" And then, from the outer edge of the circle, a voice cut through, soft but certain. "I'll take her." All heads turned. The crowd parted slowly, revealing the speaker. A man with sun-worn skin, dark hair tucked beneath a frayed trucker hat, and a weathered flannel shirt hanging from his lean frame. Silas Hart. Few in town knew him beyond whispers. The mechanic in the hills, the widower, the man with the boy who never spoke, a ghost of a man, until now. He stepped forward with quiet purpose, pulling a canvas pouch from his coat and placing it gently on the wooden platform. The sound it made, a soft clink of coins, not paper bills, rang through the silence. Everything he had. Troy squinted. "You serious? That's it?" Silas met his gaze, steady and still. "It's all I have," he said, "and it's more than she should be forced to stand here another minute for." The tension shifted. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some looked down. 1 or 2 shuffled backward, discomfort cracking their indifference. Evelyn's gaze met Silas's. Her chest rose, breath shaky but deliberate. "Why?" she asked, her voice a dry whisper. Silas didn't reach for her, didn't touch, just nodded once. "Because no one should be sold. Not you, not the child." Her bottom lip trembled, but she kept her composure. Troy, now scowling, kicked the pouch toward Silas. "Fine. Take her. Trash belongs with trash." Evelyn winced, but Silas remained calm. He picked up the pouch, turned, and began to walk. And Evelyn, she followed him, step by careful step, into the sun, into the silence, into a future neither of them could name, but somehow both knew they had to walk into. As they disappeared into the horizon, someone in the crowd shouted after them, "You'll regret that, Hart." But Silas didn't turn, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, neither did she. That evening, the sun melted behind the pine trees as Silas guided the truck to the edge of a dense forest. Evelyn, sore and weary, accepted his hand as he helped her into the cab. The silence returned, not the cold, heartless silence from the field, but a gentler one, the kind that exists between people who have known pain and are still breathing through it. "I don't expect you to thank me," Silas said as he started the engine. Evelyn stared ahead, her voice quiet. "Good. Because I don't know if I have any left." He nodded once. That was enough. They drove in stillness, the gravel crunching beneath them, the wind slipping through a cracked window. After a while, Silas spoke again. "I live up in the hills. It's not much, but there's food, water, a roof." "I can work," Evelyn said quickly. "I've worked all my life. I won't be a burden." Silas shook his head. "It's not about that. You don't have to earn safety. You're just safe now." She closed her eyes, resting her head against the cool glass. The baby moved gently beneath her ribs as if sensing the change. It wasn't hope, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, it was the place where hope could begin to grow. The cabin stood alone, tucked into the embrace of Elk Ridge's evergreens. Weathered wood, a sagging tin roof, the faintest curl of cedar smoke rising from the chimney. No welcome mat, no porch light, just quiet. As they pulled up, the front door creaked open. A small boy stood there, barefoot in an oversized shirt, pale, still, eyes wide with uncertainty. This was Finn, Silas's son. 8 years old, silent since the sudden death of his mother 3 years ago. Silas helped Evelyn out, his hand steady. She hesitated, not from distrust, but from fear that this fragile moment might shatter. But she took it. Finn didn't move, didn't blink, just watched as a stranger stepped quietly into the world he and his father had mourned in. Inside, the cabin was modest but clean. A quilt draped over a chair, a simple kitchen, a warmth not from wealth but care. "I can sleep on the floor," Evelyn said automatically. "I don't need much." Silas shook his head. "The couch folds out. You'll be more comfortable there." She nodded, hands still cradling her belly. "I'll boil some water," he offered, already walking. "Tea's in the cabinet, if you'd like it." Finn still watched from the shadows. Evelyn turned toward him with a soft smile. "You must be Finn," she said gently. He didn't answer, didn't nod, but he didn't run, and that was something. Later, after tea and a bite of toast, Evelyn sat on the pull-out bed, touching the clean sheets as if unsure they were real. Silas brought her a pillow. "Bathroom's down the hall. Hot water takes a bit," he said. "Thank you," she murmured. He stood awkwardly for a moment, then spoke with a softness that surprised even himself. "You're safe here, Evelyn. I don't know what comes next, but you can stay as long as you need." She looked up, expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" He hesitated. "Because someone should have done it for my wife, and no one did. That was all." She didn't press, and he didn't explain. It was enough. Finn sat just outside the room, listening, not to the words, but to the music beneath them, the rhythm, the tone, the things adults didn't say out loud. And in that quiet, something shifted. Evelyn didn't sleep much. The baby shifted and kicked as if sensing it too. This strange new place. The end of fear. The beginning of something else. Not quite hope, but maybe the soil where hope begins to root. At dawn, she awoke to the sound of boiling water. She moved carefully to the kitchen, and there was Finn, sitting at the table, sketching on a small whiteboard. When he saw her, he didn't hide it. He turned it around. 3 figures, one tall, one small, one with a round belly. A cabin. Smoke curling from the chimney. Evelyn's breath caught, her eyes stung. "Is that us?" she whispered. Finn didn't speak, but he nodded, and in that moment it was more than enough. Because Evelyn now carried her own quiet hope, the kind that blooms softly beneath uncertainty, something shifted that afternoon. As the clouds above the treetops began curling in lazy spirals, Finn appeared once again with the little whiteboard in his hands. He stood in front of her, eyes full of innocent wonder. "What's the baby's name?" he wrote. Evelyn paused. Her hand gently settled over her growing belly, feeling the faint flutter of life beneath her palm. A movement so delicate it felt like a whisper from within. "I don't know yet," she murmured, almost to herself. Finn tilted his head, a small frown forming as he thought deeply. Then he began scribbling again. "I think she likes your song," he wrote. That made Evelyn chuckle, the sound light and genuine. "She did kick pretty hard during the chorus," she said with a smile. Finn wiped the board clean and started again, this time writing with great care, each letter etched with deliberate intent. When he turned the board to face her, one word stood out, bold and little all at once. Hope. Evelyn froze. The marker squeaked faintly in his hand, but Finn wasn't watching her anymore. His eyes were fixed on her belly, as if waiting for another response from the life growing inside her. Hope, she whispered, the word catching on her breath. That's a beautiful name. Finn gave a small shrug, trying to seem indifferent, but the telltale redness that crept up his ears betrayed the emotion behind his suggestion. Evelyn, moved beyond words, reached out and brushed the edge of his hand with her fingers, just enough to let him know she saw him. "I think she'll love that name too," she said softly. For the very first time, Finn didn't flinch away. Later that evening, Silas returned from the woods, his hands smeared with grease and a fresh scratch across his forearm from a low-hanging branch. Evelyn met him at the door, already holding a damp towel. "No gloves again?" she asked with a gentle scold as she dabbed at the cut. "Only when I'm trying to fix things that have no business still running," he replied, managing a tired smile. "You mean like this whole place?" she teased. "Something like that," he said. She hesitated for a moment before her voice dropped to a quieter tone. Finn named the baby. Silas raised his eyebrows, his movement pausing. "He didn't say it aloud," Evelyn clarified. "He wrote it. Hope." Silas leaned back against the wall, slowly nodding. The words settled in the space between them like warmth. "That's a good name," he said quietly. Evelyn folded the towel and placed it gently on the table. "Do you mind?" Silas turned toward her, his gaze steady, like he was truly seeing her for the first time that day. "I think," he said slowly, "we could all use a little more of it." That night, after dinner, Finn sat on the rug working through an old wooden puzzle, while Evelyn gently rocked in the chair nearby, humming the same melody from earlier, her hands stroking her stomach in rhythm. Silas sipped his coffee by the hearth, quietly watching them both. And in that quiet room, with music in the air and warmth stitched into the walls, something long locked away inside him began to stir. Not a dramatic awakening, but a slow and sacred thaw. A kind of peace he hadn't dared hope for. The first snow of the season came early, sooner than even Silas had predicted. It dusted the treetops with a delicate softness, like powdered sugar sprinkled by an unseen hand. By the time Evelyn opened the cabin door the next morning, the world was already blanketed in white, the sky a canvas of pale light above her. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapping one of Silas's old flannels around her shoulders. He'd left it draped over a chair the night before. It still smelled of cedar, engine oil, and something softer, like well-loved pages of a book left open in the cold. Then she noticed it. A small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine, placed neatly at the bottom step. There were no footprints, no tire tracks, just the package resting there as though delivered by the wind itself. She looked around. Nothing. The forest stood hushed and still. Inside, she set the box on the table and carefully loosened the twine. Finn entered the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes, barefoot on the cold wood floor as if untouched by the chill. He noticed the package. "What's that?" she asked aloud, though mostly to herself. Finn grabbed his board and scribbled quickly. "Mailman doesn't come here." Evelyn nodded, still puzzled. She opened the box. Inside, a wool blanket was folded with precision. Beneath it were prenatal vitamins, a tin of cocoa, a packet of herbal tea, and a small bottle of lavender lotion. At the very bottom, tucked inside a manila envelope, was a single sheet of thick parchment. No return address, no card. Just a handwritten message penned in graceful looping script. "You are not forgotten. You are not alone. Keep walking toward the light." Evelyn stared at the note. She read it again, and then once more. Finn leaned in beside her, reading it silently. His brow furrowed. Then he tapped his board. "Who's M?" Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She ran her fingers across the delicate handwriting, allowing the ink to sink into her skin and something deeper still. "I don't know," she whispered, "but they see us." When Silas returned that evening, snow dusted across his shoulders. He noticed the blanket draped over the couch right away. Evelyn sat nearby, crocheting with her legs tucked beneath her. "There was a package this morning," she said. His gaze sharpened. No footprints? None, she confirmed. He picked up the note from beside the cocoa tin and read it silently. His jaw tightened. Could be someone playing games, he said after a pause. It didn't feel like a game. You sure? Evelyn stood, walked over to him, and placed the bottle of prenatal vitamins in his hand. If someone meant harm, would they send this? Silas looked at the bottle, then at her. No, he said softly. I don't think they would. That night, sleep didn't come easily for Evelyn. She lay on the pull-out bed watching the fire flicker on the ceiling. Her gaze rested on the folded note across the room. There was something about the handwriting, its elegance, its patience, that reminded her of a different life. A life of warm classrooms, piano recitals, and children handing her daisies from roadside ditches. A life before Troy, before the bruises beneath long sleeves, before the promises broken as easily as glass. And now, here in this forgotten corner of the world, kindness had found her again. More packages came in the following days, one with dried mango and almonds, one with handmade baby socks, a jar of calendula cream. Each package was wrapped the same way. Each included a note, short, poetic, and signed only with M. Silas tried to trace their source. Once he rose before dawn and circled the entire property in the truck, found nothing but rabbit tracks and pine needles. They've either got wings, he muttered, or they're smarter than both of us. Evelyn didn't press. She simply folded each note and tucked it into an old recipe tin in the kitchen drawer, like prayers she didn't yet know how to say aloud. One evening, Finn curled up beside her on the couch, board in his lap and tongue poking out slightly as he concentrated. He turned the board to her. Do you think Em is watching us? She considered the question and smiled. I think they're seeing us. Finn wrote again. I like being seen. She ruffled his hair. This time he didn't pull away. Silas watched them from the doorway. He didn't speak, but he understood. The house, once silent and filled with absence, had begun to hum with life again, with music, laughter, and quiet conversations written in black marker. And Evelyn, she didn't try to mend the wounds he wasn't ready to speak of. Her presence was gentle, steady, like music he hadn't heard before but wanted to learn. That night, Evelyn opened the recipe tin and added the latest note. The world is dark, yes, but there are stars and some shine brightest when you need them most. She closed the lid softly, as if it held more than just words, and perhaps it did, because somehow, finally, she no longer felt forgotten. The days shortened. The snow pressed more heavily on the roof. Evelyn moved more slowly, her hand often bracing her back. The baby, Hope, as Finn insisted, was growing strong, stronger than Evelyn imagined anything inside her could be. One morning, as Silas left early to help a neighbour, the cabin fell into a hush. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, mug of warm milk in hand, watching snow swirl through the window. Finn sat nearby on the floor with a puzzle he'd done countless times. Every now and then he looked up, not to speak, just to be sure she was still there. She had become his anchor. Then, without warning, a sharp movement rippled through her belly. She gasped and nearly dropped her mug. Finn looked up, eyes wide. "Oh, my goodness," Evelyn whispered, fingers splayed across her belly, trying to catch it. That was a kick. Finn scrambled to his feet, whiteboard forgotten. He hovered uncertainly until Evelyn gently reached out and guided his small hand to her belly. They waited. Another kick. Finn's eyes widened, his mouth opened, then closed, like he'd just witnessed something sacred. "She's saying hello," Evelyn said, her voice soft. "She knows you're here." Finn darted for his board. "I think she likes me." Evelyn laughed through tears. "She's already lucky to have you." That afternoon, Finn remained close. He helped chop vegetables, his tiny hands clumsy but determined. He set the table with care. When Silas returned, damp with snow and fatigue, he found the house glowing, not from the fire alone, but from something warmer. Finn met him at the door and simply grabbed his gloved hand, tugging him inside. "She kicked," Finn wrote later. Silas asked. Finn nodded with pride. Evelyn nodded too. "And strong," she added. Silas smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile, but a real one that softened something inside him. "I guess it's official," he said. "She's part of this house now." That night, Evelyn sat by the fire, blanket draped over her knees. A harmonica lay beside her, untouched. She hummed, not the melody from before, but something new, something wordless and intimate. Finn listened, notebook in his lap. Silas, across from Evelyn, watched her for a moment, then spoke. "Do you really plan to name her Hope?" Evelyn paused in her rocking. The chair creaked. "If she makes it, yes, she will." The words came faster than he intended, but they stayed, bold and unshaken. Evelyn smiled, not just at the name, but because Silas believed it too. Hope wasn't just a word anymore. It was a promise. He knelt quietly before her, his rough, work-worn hand gently resting over hers, eyes searching her face with concern. "You all right?" he asked softly. Evelyn met his gaze, really looked, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe the sincerity threaded through his voice. A breath escaped her lips, shaky but steadying. "I think I will be." That night, Evelyn sat on the porch, wrapped snugly in a quilt. The child within her stirred restlessly, and so did her thoughts. She didn't cry, not this time. There was something firmer rooted inside her now. It wasn't that fear had vanished, but that courage had finally arrived to stand beside it. Silas joined her without a word, 2 steaming mugs in hand. He lowered himself beside her and murmured, "He's gone, for now." He handed her a cup and let the silence settle. "I meant what I said. He doesn't come back here, ever again." She nodded slowly, then after a long pause, her voice was quiet but meaningful. "You didn't have to step in like that, but you did." Silas looked down at his calloused hands. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "I wasn't there the way I should have been. Not before." She tilted her head gently. "For your wife?" He gave a small nod. "Yeah, she was sick, and I thought if I worked harder, if I fixed the problems, I could beat it, that I could somehow outrun what was happening. But I was wrong. I missed the moments that really mattered." Evelyn reached over, her fingers brushing lightly against his. Her touch was soft but full of understanding. "You didn't miss this one." Their eyes met, and for the first time, the silence between them felt full. Not empty. Full of things neither had yet found the words to say, but both had begun to understand. Inside the cabin, Finn had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over him with the stitched name Hope cradling his small frame. The house no longer felt like a mere structure of wood and stone. It felt like the beginning of something. Something more difficult, perhaps, but deeper. A kind of healing that starts not in the mind, but in the marrow of one's bones. Evelyn placed her hand gently over her belly, her voice a whisper carried only to the child she carried. "You're safe now, little one, and you're going to be born in a house that chose kindness." But nature, as it often does, had its own timing. The storm rolled in, not like a soft drift of snow, but with a vengeance, a wild winter fury reclaiming stillness that had lasted too long. Trees bent in protest as winds curled through the forest, and by nightfall the cabin windows were lashed by snow, the fire crackling against a draught creeping under the door. Evelyn stood at the kitchen sink, both hands braced against the countertop. Her breath was shallow. The first sharp pang had come 2 hours earlier. The second followed barely 20 minutes after. Now they were arriving in intervals too close to ignore. She hadn't wanted to speak the truth aloud. Didn't want to startle Finn, who sat curled near the fire with his notebook. Didn't want to distract Silas, who was out in the shed securing the roof. And most of all, she wasn't ready to admit it to herself. But the baby had made her choice. Another wave of pain surged through her, stronger, deeper. She dropped the dishcloth and braced herself with trembling arms, a low groan slipping from her lips. Finn's head snapped up. "Evelyn?" he asked, his voice as delicate as a flickering candle. She turned toward him, mustering a practiced smile despite the tremble in her legs. "It's okay, sweetheart. She's just in a hurry." But Finn had already moved. Notebook in hand, he darted to the door and threw it open into a whirlwind of snow and shrieking wind. He yelled into the storm, "Dad!" Moments later, Silas burst through the door, soaked to the bone, snow clinging to his beard and boots. His eyes landed on Evelyn, pale and breathless, gripping the table for support. And in an instant he understood. "How far apart?" he asked quickly. 8 minutes, maybe 7, she gasped, wincing again. Silas nodded, already moving with a calm precision. "Finn, bring every clean towel we've got, then grab the first aid kit from under the sink." The boy bolted into action, no questions asked. Evelyn looked up at Silas, her voice thin with fear. "There's no hospital for 30 miles. "I know," he said, his voice steady. "The roads are buried." "I know," he repeated gently. He took her arm, supporting her as they slowly made their way to the pull-out bed near the fire, the warmest corner of the cabin. "I don't want to do this alone," she whispered, voice quivering. "You're not," he replied without hesitation. The next hour passed in a blur. Contractions intensified, towels soaked in hot water. Silas worked beside her, sleeves rolled, his presence constant and grounding. "You're doing good, Evelyn," he murmured. "You're stronger than you think." She tried to hold on to his words, but fear crept into her ribs. Not fear of the pain, but of the unknown, of loss, of heartbreak. Then a sound broke through it all. A small, steady voice from across the room. "I'm here." Evelyn turned her head, sweat clinging to her brow. Finn, he knelt beside the bed, holding her hand with both of his. His notebook had fallen forgotten. And in those 2 words, his first spoken in months, was all the strength she needed. Evelyn wept. Not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming release of something sacred, of belief restored. At 2:11 a.m., beneath a storm-battered roof and beside a dying fire, hope entered the world, red-faced, lungs strong, very much alive. Silas wrapped the newborn in a towel with more gentleness than he had ever shown to anything mechanical. He handed her carefully to Evelyn, who pulled her daughter to her chest and whispered through joyful tears, "I've got you now." Finn climbed up beside them and rested his head gently on her shoulder, just above the baby. Silas sat back on his heels, chest heaving, releasing a breath he hadn't known he'd held for hours. And for the first time since his wife's death, he didn't feel the world leaning backward toward grief. He felt it shifting forward toward something he couldn't quite name yet. Later, as the storm quieted into nothing more than soft flakes tumbling outside, Evelyn lay resting, hope cradled in her arms. Silas sat nearby, rubbing warmth into his fingers, watching the fire dim to glowing embers. "She's got lungs," he said with a soft smile. Evelyn's eyes remained closed, a smile tugging at her lips. "She's got fire." A long silence followed, peaceful, reflective, until she spoke again, voice filled with unspoken truths. "You saved us." Silas shook his head. "You saved me." He hesitated, then continued, "Before you came, I was just passing time. Wake up, work, keep my son alive, but I wasn't living." He looked at her. The woman who had entered his broken life and helped build something whole from the wreckage. "I didn't realize how much I'd lost, until you reminded me what was still possible." Evelyn reached for his hand. "You gave me more than safety. You gave me a place where I could be more than someone else's broken story. A home to bring her into." They sat that way, hands entwined, reverent of the miracle they had witnessed. As dawn crept in, casting a faint silver blue across the treetops, there was a soft knock at the door. Silas rose, cautious. When he opened it, no one stood there, only a small basket wrapped in red flannel. Inside, a hand-stitched baby blanket, a neat bundle of fresh oranges, and a card written in familiar, elegant script. "A storm always clears, and what survives it becomes something stronger. Welcome, little hope, M." He stepped out, scanning the forest. No footprints, no sound, just stillness. Silas brought the basket in and set it on the table. Evelyn opened her eyes, saw the card, the flannel, and smiled gently. "Still watching," she said. "Always," he replied. And somewhere within the walls of that little cabin in Elk Ridge, where storms once raged and hearts once shattered, something had changed forever. A child had been born, a family had come into being, and hope, true and resilient, had found a way to stay. The storm had passed, but it left behind more than snowdrifts and fallen branches. It left a stillness, like the mountain itself had paused to witness what had taken place within. Evelyn lay in bed, hope bundled close, her tiny lips parting in dream-filled sleep. Her cheeks glowed from the firelight, her breathing steady and secure. Finn hovered nearby, sketching scenes into his notebook. His sister's first cry, her small hand, the hearth, the blizzard. Silas moved through the cabin with quiet reverence, as if every gesture now belonged to a home that had been transformed by love and life. But the outside world had not forgotten how to question. Within 2 days, whispers spread. The mail truck arrived, not with letters, but with stories. That Evelyn had been there, that she had delivered a child, that she wasn't his wife. By late afternoon, the first visitor arrived, Mr. Crowley from the feed store. He stood awkwardly on the porch, hat in hand, unsure whether to knock or turn back. Silas opened the door before the man could decide. Crowley cleared his throat. "Heard some talk," he muttered. "Just Thought I'd come see." Silas waited. "They're saying things. That you took in a woman, that she's got a baby, that she ain't your wife." Silas's voice was calm but unwavering. "All true." Crowley blinked. "You're not denying it?" "No need to. You want to know what else is true? She's brave. She brought back my boy's voice, and she brought a child into this world when most would have turned away, and not once has she asked for more than a warm place to stand." The old man looked down, his thumb tracing the rim of his hat. "People are talking, saying it ain't right." Silas leaned against the doorframe. "Let 'em talk. I'd rather stand beside someone the world threw away than with the world that did the throwing." Crowley hesitated, then reached into his truck. "Brought diapers," he said softly. "My granddaughter asked me to deliver them." Silas accepted the bag with a nod. "Thank you." By the third day, more visitors came. A woman from the post office left a basket of bread. The carpenter's wife brought hand-me-downs. An elderly churchgoer who had never said more than a polite hello delivered a knitted cap stitched with Hope's name, as if she had known all along. Some came with kindness, some with questions, a few with judgment, and one came with fire. The second knock came, sharper this time, urgent and fast. Silas opened the door to find a man he didn't recognize. Broad-shouldered, face flushed ruddy from the cold, or drink, he reeked of gasoline and old beer. "You Silas Hart?" The man barked, his tone thick with accusation. "I am," Silas replied calmly. The man jabbed a finger toward the cabin. "That girl you've got inside, she's nothing but trouble. You know it. We all know it. Bringing her back here, letting her settle in, that's going to cost you." Silas stood his ground, arms crossed over his chest, steady as stone. "You've said what you came to say, now go." But the man didn't budge. "You think people like her change? They don't. She's not your problem. Don't make her your mess." Silas stepped forward, his voice firm, quiet, but unshakable. "You're standing on my porch, talking about a woman who gave birth in the middle of a snowstorm, without once asking for help or pity. So before you throw around the word mess, maybe take a long look at who's actually making one right now." The man's eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." Silas's voice was steady. "Then I'll regret it standing up, not crawling." With a curse and a hard spit to the ground, the man turned and disappeared into the darkness. 10 minutes later, smoke curled upward from the fence post out front. Silas was already outside by the time the flames began to lick the rail, beating at it with a soaked blanket until it was smothered. It hadn't spread far. It wasn't meant to. It was a message, a threat in embers, not an attempt to destroy, but to intimidate. As he turned back toward the cabin, he saw her, Evelyn, standing in the doorway. She didn't cry. She didn't rush to check if he was all right. She just looked at him and said softly, "I won't be the reason this place burns." Breathing hard, Silas met her eyes. "You're not the reason it might burn," he said, voice trembling with emotion. "You're the reason it's still standing." That night, they didn't say much. They simply sat, just the three of them. Evelyn cradled little Hope close to her chest. Finn nestled beside her, his small body pressed into her side for warmth and comfort. Silas sat nearby, holding a mug of black coffee in his calloused hands, his eyes reflecting the firelight. The cabin no longer felt like it was bracing for attack. It felt courageous. Evelyn looked across the room at him, over the curve of the baby's blanket. "Why is it so easy for them to hate?" she asked, her voice gentle, tired. Silas spoke softly, eyes still on the fire. "Because hate is simpler than understanding, and a whole lot easier than admitting they could have helped, but chose not to." She gave a slow nod. "We can't hide forever." "I know, but we can't leave either." Silas turned to her, really seeing her. "You're not going anywhere." There was a pause, a long, fragile one, and then Evelyn smiled. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because, for the first time, someone had told her she could simply stay. The next morning, the sound of quiet voices outside pulled Silas to the door. A small group of neighbors had gathered. 5 or 6 stood in a loose circle near a portable camp stove someone had dragged in on a sled. No torches, no angry signs, just warm cups of coffee and silent solidarity. When Silas opened the door, a tall ranch woman with silver braids and work-worn leather gloves stepped forward and offered him a box of canned goods. She looked him in the eye and said, with steady conviction, "We stand with the baby." Silas's lips curved into a quiet smile. Then come on in. That spring, the snow melted slowly, as if reluctant to loosen its grip on what it had hidden for so long. But melt it did, as it always did. Persistent and patient. Ice turned to rivulets. Bare branches hinted at new life with budding tips. The mountain shed its frozen shell, revealing the soft soil beneath, ready for growth. Inside the cabin, new life had already taken root. Hope was nearly 3 months old. She had her mother's chin, her father's nose, Evelyn would say with a soft laugh, and eyes like Finn's. Not the colour, but the depth, the same wide, knowing gaze that already understood this world held both cruelty and wonder. She rarely cried. When she did, it wasn't loud or piercing. It was a soft whimper, a gentle reminder that she was there, still listening. And Finn, once so silent that even the walls of the house echoed with it, had found his voice again. Not everywhere. Not yet. But in the quiet moments, in the safety of home, he began to speak again. Carefully. Thoughtfully. Like every word mattered. It started with books. Evelyn would sit on the couch, Hope curled in one arm and a picture book in the other. Finn would press close, first just listening, then whispering the words and eventually reading them aloud. The day he read an entire page on his own, Silas had to excuse himself. Not because he wasn't proud, but because the feeling in his chest had grown so full, it was almost painful. That night, Silas stood on the porch, staring up at the stars, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. Evelyn joined him, gently swaying from rocking the baby to sleep. He read aloud, she whispered. I heard, Silas murmured. You okay? He nodded, then blinked back tears. It's just, I didn't know if I'd ever hear his voice again. Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. You gave him more than your name, Silas. You gave him silence that didn't shame him, and now he's choosing to fill it. Silas swallowed the knot in his throat. That's your doing, Evelyn, she smiled. No, that's love's doing. We just made space for it to grow. Later that week, the local schoolteacher, Miss Delaney, stopped by with an invitation to a small spring gathering. Just something simple, she said, to bring everyone together after the winter. We're inviting kids to read, sing, share something if they want to. No pressure. That evening, Finn read the invitation carefully, then looked up, uncertainty flickering in his expression. You don't have to, Silas said quickly, but Evelyn laid a gentle hand on Finn's shoulder. Only if you want to. Finn looked down again. Can hope come? It was still a jolt every time he spoke, like a rare treasure. Silas and Evelyn exchanged a smile. She wouldn't miss it, Evelyn promised. The night of the event arrived with the ease of a breeze. The town hall glowed under strings of soft white lights, and the scent of cinnamon and old pine filled the room. Finn sat near the front, his knees bouncing with nervous energy, notebook clutched tightly to his chest. Hope was peaceful in Evelyn's arms, a delicate bonnet framing her round cheeks, gifted by one of the neighbours. When his name was called, Finn hesitated for just a second, then rose. Each step toward the microphone was deliberate. The room hushed. He opened his notebook. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was clear, honest, steady. This is a story about a house in the woods, a house that was quiet, a house that hurt. Then a woman came with a baby in her belly. She brought singing and soup and a name. The baby was born during a storm. Her name is Hope. This is a story about my family. It is not broken. It is ours. When he finished, the room was silent, not from apathy, but because no one could speak. Most had tears on their cheeks. That night, back at home, Finn climbed into bed without being asked. Hope was already fast asleep in her crib. Evelyn stood at the sink, drying dishes. Silas sat at the table, still hearing his son's voice echoing in the quiet. When Evelyn turned, she saw it, the softness in his shoulders, the peace on his face that hadn't been there in years. You okay? She asked. He nodded slowly. Then, quietly, I keep thinking this can't be real. What part? She asked gently. That he spoke, that he stood up there like that, that he said, ours. She sat beside him, voice tender. You didn't rescue us, Silas. You made space. You let something grow that had no reason to survive way out here. That kind of love, it doesn't shout. It looks like this. He looked at her, voice cracking. I was so afraid I'd fail him again. You didn't, she whispered. You gave him what no one else did. You stayed. Silence settled in, the kind that means nothing more needs to be said. And then, for the first time, deliberate, not accidental, Silas reached across the table and took Evelyn's hand. It was rough, warm, steady, and when she didn't let go, something deep inside both of them finally rested. Outside, the wind whispered reverently through the trees, and inside, the cabin glowed, not from the fire, not from the lamp, but from something far more enduring. A voice returned. It often arrives quietly, not with grand gestures, but in the simple, profound ways that life reveals its warmth. A small hand reaching out to hold yours, the soft exhale of someone breathing beside you, unafraid, because you both chose one another again that morning. And with quiet certainty, you will choose each other again tomorrow after dinner. That evening, Silas lit the porch lantern. Its gentle golden glow spilled down the wooden steps, casting soft light on the wildflowers that now danced freely in the wind. It was the same lantern that had remained cold and untouched for so many silent years. Yet now it lit up every evening without fail, not just for them, but for anyone out there who might be wandering through darkness in need of a little light. As twilight settled over the landscape, Evelyn leaned her head on Silas's shoulder. Hope, their daughter, lay peacefully asleep in her lap, a warm, comforting weight. Just a few feet away, Finn sat cross-legged, absorbed in his worn sketchbook, one he never left behind. He raised it to show them what he'd drawn. The porch, the rocking chair, Hope nestled in Evelyn's arms, Silas by her side, and Finn himself sitting at their feet. Above them, a gentle scattering of stars lit the night sky. At the top of the page, in his deliberate handwriting, he had written, "This is our porch. It used to be dark. Now it is full of light." Evelyn reached over and gently took his hand. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice full of awe and tenderness. Silas looked at Finn and said softly, "You're going to write books one day." Finn beamed. "I think I already did." They all laughed quietly together, not the loud, half-boisterous kind of laughter, but the kind that's soft and healing. The kind that rises only when hearts have been broken and mended in the very same place. As night deepened, a cool breeze stirred the air, carrying with it the earthy scent of pine mixed with something sweeter, the fragrance of lilacs blooming just beneath Hope's window. Silas had planted that bush in her name. Suddenly, Evelyn reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded, time-worn piece of paper. "I've been saving this," she said gently. "I found it tucked inside Hope's first onesie. I think it was from Margot." She unfolded it slowly, smoothing the creases with care. The paper bore an elegant looping script, familiar and warm. "A house is built with wood and nails. A home is built with time and tenderness. You've made a home. Keep your porch light on. Someone else is still looking for the way." They sat in silence for a long while after that, letting those words settle into their hearts and into the night air, letting them become part of the space they had built together. By morning, the porch light was still glowing. Not because someone had forgotten to turn it off, but because you just never know who might be walking a lonely path, searching for even the faintest glow to guide them home. 1 year later, the porch had transformed. A second rocking chair now sat beside the first. A new flower bed had been added, and the porch railing bore a line of painted handprints, an idea Finn had insisted on. Even little Hope had added hers, smearing vibrant purple paint across the wood in her own joyful way. The once quiet mailbox had grown unexpectedly busy. Letters began arriving weekly, some from neighbours, others from complete strangers. But they all carried variations of the same message. "I heard what you did. I thought there was no place for someone like me. Now I believe maybe there is." They kept every letter, folded delicately and placed inside the old tin where Evelyn had once stored Margot's anonymous notes. That same tin now sat beneath a hand-drawn label in Finn's bold print. "Miracles. Daily." One final letter arrived that autumn, a small note written in the same familiar handwriting they'd come to love and recognize. It read, "You once needed a miracle. Now you are one. Don't forget that. M." Evelyn read it aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. Then she carefully placed it with the others. She turned to Silas, who was gently bouncing Hope on his hip while Finn read aloud from a new book. "Do you think we really are?" she asked quietly. Silas tilted his head slightly. "Are what?" he asked, though the answer hung already in the air. "Miracles," she said. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around at the porch, at the little world they had created, the family they had become. The life they had shaped from pieces of heartbreak, forgiveness, and the hard but beautiful decision to keep showing up. Then he smiled. Not the kind of smile that seeks attention, but one full of knowing. The kind of smile that carries the weight of all it took to arrive at this peaceful place, and the deep awareness that it had been worth it. Yes, he said at last, we are. And sometimes, the quietest acts of kindness become the loudest miracles of our lives. If this story found a place in your heart, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments and help us build a community that spans not only stories, but continents and kindness. If you'd like more stories like this, stories that remind us of the goodness still alive in the world, feel free to subscribe. No pressure, just a light left on, in case you ever feel like coming home again.